In the 80-plus years since the House of Mouse began creating animated pictures, or in the 22 years since their biggest rival, DreamWorks, began making their own, we have covered a lot of ground. From the classic fairy tales of Cinderella and Snow White, to the subversion of those tropes in Shrek. From the stories about anthropomorphic animals, to ones about futuristic robots on a dead Earth. Yet, with such a huge library, there's one family-friendly genre that has essentially zero coverage by either studio, surprisingly.
From this pivotal point, astronauts, at the risk of their lives, set out to conquer nature's mysterious forces.
The true science fiction space opera. The only major picture that approximates this space opera feel is Disney's Treasure Planet. But that verges more on the fantastical, with its literal pirate ships soaring through the ether and stemming from the adaptation of the classic book it was based off of. It was a good movie nonetheless, and I highly recommend fellow YouTuber Breadsword's video on it, link in the description. No, in all that time we have never received a true major animated space opera film. That is, until June of 2000, when Fox Animation, a now defunct studio, released Titan AE. The movie was originally slated to be live action. However, Bill Mechanic, the chairman of 20th Century Fox at the time, handed it off to the Fox Animation Studio. According to producer Gary Goldman, Mechanic's official reasoning was that, quote, he thought it would be good in CGI. The script had already been passed around Hollywood at the time between multiple directors, including Joss Whedon of The Avengers and Buffy fame, without gaining any traction, and had already spent nearly $30 million without any progress being made. Finally, it landed at the feet of the animation duo Goldman and Bluth. The two had worked on many large animated films previously, like The Land Before Time, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Anastasia, among others. Having been former Disney employees, their goal was to create films that competed successfully with the behemoth corporation, and they had, in fact, been successful, up until they were given the film mid-1998. They were given a $75 million budget to work with, an entire studio, and the movie had the benefit of CGI creating most backgrounds, in addition to characters such as the Dredge alien race, all of which made up about 80% of the animation overall, according to Goldman. Not only that, but Titan AE has a quintessentially early 2000s pop-punk, I'm mad at my dad for not giving me an allowance soundtrack. Bands I grew up with like Lit and Powerman 5000 and, Jamiroquai? Luscious Jacksons? Yeah, I don't know who that is. Regardless, the sound of it captured well the generation at the time, pointing right at the Jinko jeans wearing frosted tips having youth. Though it received mixed reviews, the largest film critic at the time, Roger Ebert, gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars, and a pretty glowing review, saying it was, quote, a film that uses the freedom of animation to visualize the strangeness of the universe in ways live action cannot duplicate, and then joins its vision to a rousing story. Don Bluth's Titan AE creates the kinds of feelings I had as a teenager, paging eagerly through Asimov and Heinlein. There are moments when it even stirs a little awe. And just using one's eyes, it's easy to see why. This film is just beautiful. Definitely something that would never have worked in live action, especially in 1998. From the brilliant yellows and crimson reds of Sesharim, starting in the incredibly alien hydrogen balloon forest, and ending with the gals swirling in flight around the main characters, to the nearly luminescent ice crystals in the third act beautifully crunching and scraping against each other, and brilliantly showing their scope. And by extension, the films. The movie is, if nothing else, an absolute visual treat. Even by today's standards, most of the CGI isn't even noticeable and blends in with the traditionally animated characters, making the world just feel alive, save for the final scenes of the New Earth terrain. Unfortunately though, financially the movie was a failure of the worst kind. With a $75 million budget, it needed to do exceedingly well, which it did not. Overall theater and home video sales topped out at nearly $36 million, and according to Chris Meledandri, it lost the studio around $100 million overall. The $75 million budget would put it around the 13th highest budget for a traditionally animated film, though strangely it isn't listed anywhere on the top 25 wiki list. Adjusted for inflation, that's nearly $120 million in 2020 dollars. So its failure was nearly on par with a flagship Disney Pixar movie like Frozen, Moana, or Zootopia, flopping right onto its face. Except the studio that produced it wasn't nearly as large as Disney, and the loss turned out to be the death knell for Fox Animation. Even the production itself was fraught with problems. Nearly $30 million was spent with nothing accomplished before it switched from live action. The producers were only given a year and a half to work on the project, and nearly 6 months in, 300 people were laid off, which forced Fox Animation Studios to outsource much of the CGI to multiple other studios. The same year Titan AE released, Fox Animation Studios officially closed. Their doors shuttered. So the question is beginning to form. Why did this movie do so poorly? A space opera with the punk rock soundtrack was like a Chris Kyle sniper shot aimed perfectly for the adolescent boys market. Okay, admittedly that wasn't the best choice of metaphor, but a movie like this with an enormous budget and the likes of Matt Damon and Drew Barrymore heading up the cast should have been a no-brainer for boys that age. I should know, I'm one of them. So why then? Why did it fail? Well, to answer that, we should first know a little bit more about the movie itself. So to start, I'm going to simply, factually, recount the events of the film without commentary, questions, or asides. Okay? Okay. You see what I did there? That was a Lindsay Ellis thing. I did an homage. The film itself is set primarily in space in the year 3028, after an alien race, the Dredge, spelled D-R-E-J, completely destroyed Earth, a la the Death Star in Star Wars, hence the title AE, after Earth. It begins on a child playing with a toy as the world is ending. This is the main character, Kale. Quickly, his father rushes him to one of the many refugee ships to escape the coming attack of the Dredge. His father gives him a gold ring and leaves to save a mysterious government scientific program, the Titan Project. The project is revealed to be some sort of spaceship that escapes as well, but apparently on a much different trajectory. Fast forward a decade or so, and we see Kale, a now young adult working as a scrapper on a space station. He has not seen his father since that day, and humans as a race have become scarce refugees scattered in a galaxy full of aliens. Kale is finishing up with his shift, cutting the ship parts with a laser thingy, and then, while trying to skip a line to get into the space station, he runs into a ship with a woman inside. She ignores Kale and shuts the ship's viewport shields, so he gives up and makes his way inside. There he eats still alive green spaghetti and balls that look like COVID-19 with an alien friend that was with him when he escaped Earth. And then he gets into a fight with a different, bully alien, but is saved by a mysterious older man. Turns out, old dude is named Corso. He was a friend of Kale's father. A little back and forth ensues, and Corso explains that the ring Kale's father gave him was actually a map to the Titan ship, which was lost. As he is showing Kale the map, the Dredge attack the space station. Kale flees with Corso, and this happens.
Why is this happening to me? Stupid dog, please, you stupid! Ah! Hi, they went right down here. They came in my kitchen and they bullseye.
They managed to escape on a ship, the Valkyrie, the same one the woman named Akima was on earlier. He meets the rest of the ship's alien crew. The inventor Goon.
Yes!
Hey.
Perfect! You fixed it!
Preed, the wisecracking fish horseman.
This is the Valkyrie, not a singles bar.
We're done.
And Stith, the muscle and weapons expert.
Fight the good fight, precious.
Preed, I'll kill you. Okay? I will kill you.
Apparently, the map points to a moon of the planet called Sesharim, so the team decides to go to the planet. On the way, Corso explains to Kale that the Titan ship was so important because it was capable of creating a new home for the humans. Sesharim is an ocean planet covered in balloons of explosive hydrogen and inhabited by the Gaul, a race of intelligent birdie boys. The main birdie boy points up to the moon and shows Kale that the map lines up with some stars and points to a nebula. Meanwhile, Goon and Preed are left to watch the ship for a Dredge attack, but are distracted, so Kale and the ship's crew are caught off guard and have to run back to the ship. On the way, however, Kale and Akima are taken captive. Inside the Dredge ship, they begin to bond. Kale's starting to understand why Akima is so hopeful for the human race's future, and therefore the promise of the Titan ship. When they arrive at the Dredge mothership, Kale is taken and held mid-air while a light shines through his hand, stealing a snapshot of the map. They then jettison Akima in a pod and shut Kale away in a cell. There appears to be some sort of time skip there, but next we see the Valkyrie's crew pulling the old master transporting slave trick on a door guard, but the dumb door guard trope is subverted and they are forced to knock him out instead. It turns out that Akima's pod ended up at this space station, and she is reunited with the crew. Back on the Dredge ship, Kale escapes his cell and commandeers a Dredge fighter ship and flies to find the Valkyrie. Somehow, we aren't told how, he manages to find them and has an awkward, briefly romantic reunion with Akima.
The boy is not dead. This is cause for happiness.
Then we have a little bonding scene between Kale and Corso where the older man lets him fly the ship through a planet's gas rings as they are followed by wake angels. Before going on to find the Titan, the ship stops at the New Bangkok space station to resupply, during which Akima and Kale overhear Corso arguing with the Dredge leader, King Guy. Apparently, they had made a deal that Corso would use Kale to find the Titan and then turn it over to the Dredge. Preed catches Kale and Akima, then shows him to Corso at gunpoint. A chase ensues where Akima is shot through the shoulder, and they escape into the space station. For some reason, Corso gives up and leaves them there. The residents of the space station are set to treating Akima's gunshot wound. When she is healed enough, Kale tells her that he knows how to catch Corso and save the Titan. Cue the montage of Kale, Akima, and the space station citizens all fixing up an old ship.
Because we launched yesterday.
Drew Barrymore gives this classic line.
Should I get out and push?
They're successful and take off, following Corso and the Valkyrie. So Kale and Akima manage to catch the Valkyrie in the ice rings, but Corso sees them and a game of hide and seek in the giant ice crystals ensues. Finally, Kale and Akima find the Titan and dock, but Corso and Preed are right behind them. As they're leaving the Valkyrie, Preed leaves a bomb with Stith and Goon. They're injured when it explodes, but aren't killed as Goon throws the bomb away. On board the Titan, Kale uses his ring to interact with the ship and is told by a hologram of his father that the ship's power is depleted and that he has to refuel it to start the Earth creation process. Corso and Preed finally catch up, and there's a standoff as Preed reveals that he has another deal with the Dredge and double-crosses Corso. He reveals that the Dredge are nearly there. A fight ensues, and this happens. Kale and Corso tumble off the platform they were on, Corso falling presumably to his death, but is shown catching himself. Quickly, Kale and Akima hatch a plan to use the Dredge, who are quote-unquote pure energy, to power the Titan ship. But one of the circuit breakers is broken and has to be fixed manually. Kale goes outside to fix it as the Dredge begin to attack, and is helped by Corso, who is still alive and had a change of heart. Meanwhile, Goon has
I finished my nap.
and begins to fight off the Dredge inside the Valkyrie. Corso tells Kale to leave as the Dredge are powering up their Death Star laser and sacrifices himself to fix the connection. Instead of blowing up the Titan, the laser is used to power it, and all the Dredge are absorbed. The Titan then shoots out beams of energy and munch up all the ice crystals, forming them somehow into a planet in the time of a short cutaway. We next see Kale and Akima on the planet, standing on a cliff in the rain, and debating on what to call the new home for the humans. As the movie ends, we see many of the human drift colonies making their way to the new Earth. Alright, so that was the plot. A fairly standard adventure story where the characters have to find the MacGuffin. Right. However, if you were paying attention, there is very little fat here. I didn't skip any scenes in my summary. There are very few scenes that aren't actively pushing the plot along. And I have watched this movie at least 10 times in preparation for this video, so I was keeping tally. By my count, there are only 2 scenes which don't actually push the plot. But both are important moments when Kale bonds with Akima while they are captured, and when he bonds with Corso during the Wake Angel scene. They serve the purpose of giving character to Akima, showing Kale the error in his logic, and humanizing Corso, who would soon betray them. Every other scene has an active purpose in pushing along the plot. Coming in at a hair over an hour and a half, the film uses its time very efficiently, unlike the video you are currently watching. As far as the plot is concerned, there is little to criticize. There are a few plot holes, but nothing major, and this isn't CinemaSins, so I'm not going to spend time pointing them out. Well, okay, maybe just one. Why did they go to the planet Sesharim instead of the broken moon, which was on the map? All they knew was that the moon was being pointed to, yet they landed on the planet to look up at it instead of just landing on the moon? Anyways, the film overall is a simple story of a man learning to let himself care about something external to himself, beginning with a girl and ending with the entire human race. It's a simple story of a man on an adventure to an all-powerful MacGuffin. It's a tale of the overwhelming power of the human spirit overcoming incalculable odds, no less than the destruction of our only homeworld. If any of those things sounded familiar, well, good. They should. Much of the plot falls into these sorts of action-adventure space opera tropes. But they're tropes for a reason. They usually work pretty well, and as noted before, hard sci-fi tropes like these hadn't been packaged in a Western-style major animated film to this point. So it's not like the story itself alienated audiences. What about the characters? Well, Cale, the main character voiced by Matt Damon, is well fleshed out. When we meet him, he's just a boy, instantly recognizable as being precocious, innocent, and hopeful. Hell, he's literally playing with a toy in the forest as the world is ending. Then the plot happens, the dredge come, and the skip forward. And the next time we see Cale, he's both literally adrift in a space station and psychologically adrift after losing everything, including his father, never knowing what happened to him. Just by his character's interactions with the people around him, and the contrast between this and himself as a boy, we can infer what his life has been like since Earth. Going from station to station, never really having a home, never really having a family, forced to learn to be selfish and defensive to get away from the anti-human prejudices we see in the galaxy's other species. All that is achieved without going into any detailed explanations or flashbacks, efficiency, as well as good storytelling. So he is very clearly only looking out for himself when he first hears of the Titan. But after being welcomed by the crew and becoming close with Akima and learning her past, he begins to care about her. And then the rest of them, Goon, especially Goon. By the end of the film, he has given up his selfishness and has learned to hope again. Corso is the second of the main trio that we are introduced to. Voiced by Bill Pullman, Mr. Today We Celebrate Independence Day himself, despite having less star power and, well, Oscars than Matt Damon, Pullman really adds a weight to the story that wouldn't have been there without him. Actually, let's take a quick detour to talk about the performances here. Matt's performance through a lot of the movie, especially the first part of the film, is kind of at odds with the character of Cale as he was drawn. The animation is excitable and, well, animated, while Matt's performance is often quiet and aloof, such as this scene near the beginning of the movie.
You know, I do an honest day's work. I want already dead food. Is that too much for a fella to ask?
Do you hear a crackling sound?
And what was up with Chow Kid? You should have seen him.
Not much chance of that.
He was so out of control, treating me like I'm some kind of...
Human?
In contrast, Pullman's Corso is an exact fit. He is world-weary, a man who suffered much of what Cale did, but as an adult that presumably bears the guilt of letting his homeworld be destroyed, while he was powerless to help it. Cale was just a kid when it happened, and couldn't have done anything, but Corso, being some government official, would have had some influence on the events. Where Cale just gave up, Corso was so twisted that he sided with the aliens who destroyed Earth, and tried to help them destroy the only chance his species had at surviving. In fact, Corso is exactly the sort of man that Cale would have become had he continued down the path he was on. Of course, we aren't shown or told any of these motivations, instead being left to infer them by the events of the story. And yet, despite those monstrous decisions, we see that even a person such as Corso can change and learn to sacrifice himself for something greater by the end of the film. In the end, even he is allowed a sliver of redemption. What about Akima? Well, she is basically Cale's opposite in every regard. But first, let's talk about the Asian elephant in the room. Her character was definitely whitewashed. While it isn't explicitly stated, Akima is clearly of Asian descent, though she was voiced by Drew Barrymore, who is not. But this movie was made in '98, so whitewashing and general Asian stereotyping were basically par for the course. Anyways, Akima grew up with a family in one of the drifter colonies that humanity built out of the fleeing refugee ships and whatever other salvage they could find. She is the hopeful and optimistic counterpoint to Cale's aloof indifference. Plus, she has this iconic line.
Should I get out and push?
Unlike Cale, she has something to fight for, her family and friends who are doubtless still living on one of those drifter colonies, so her optimism makes perfect sense. She brings a lot of humanity to the film when the two main male characters are often just cold and cynical, but she isn't the only one. Now we get to talk about my favorite character in the film, Goon. John Leguizamo, you brilliant, beautiful man, I love you for making this character so awesome. Why haven't I seen you in anything lately? No, Goon may not have a deep backstory or a compelling arc, but just listen to this squeal.
Hey.
Perfect! You fixed it!
He is the sort of amalgamation of the usual animal sidekick mixed with the nerdy science member of the team, and the result is absolutely brilliant. And if he isn't your favorite character too, then I will come through the screen and fight you. The last two characters of the film are Stith and Preed. Not a lot to say about them, as they are mostly the caricatures of the genre. Stith is the weapons expert who is unsurprisingly gruff and has the weirdest fucking legs. Like, seriously, look at this. Who thought this was a good idea? And Preed is just... his job is... I don't actually know what he does on the ship, other than make sarcastic comments and backstab his friends. Honestly, the only purpose he serves is to have a reason for the Dredge to find the Titan in the third act. Take him out of the film and not much else changes. The double betrayal by him was just a tad unnecessary and ends with this scene. Yikes, that's not Disney family friendly. Finally, we have the main antagonists of the film, the Dredge. Nah, I'm only joking. The Dredge are sort of a red herring in that regard. Really, they are just the symbol of the true antagonist. Sure, they're certainly the villains of the film, but the true antagonist is the feelings of hopelessness and indifference, as well as their main anthropomorphism in Corso. This is why the movie succeeds so well in my eyes. As with any good sci-fi, the science part is just a vehicle to explore complex human topics. Throughout the movie, we see Kale fighting with himself, only glimpsing pieces of honest humanity until the end of the second act when Akima is injured. The entire third act is not so much fighting the Dredge, but fighting the entire universe that is slowly crushing the entire species from existence. And when he finally defeats the Dredge, it's by spreading his newfound hope for the species onto Corso, and by converting the Dredge into energy to power the Titan. He's literally taking the symbol of his own feelings of hopelessness, of insecurity, of failure, all the negative emotions that led Corso down his path, and using them as fuel to build a new world for his people. I honestly can't think of a better metaphor for overcoming the human struggle than that. So, if the plot was decent, if uninspired, and the characters were, on the whole, well written, then why did this movie fail? Plenty of other animated films worse than this one have done decently at the box office. So what made this movie fail so hard that it literally sunk the major animation studio that made it? Well, let's talk about their demographic. Fox Animation made this movie and its advertising to target adolescent boys between 12 and 17. That's already a fairly slim demo, and it wasn't helped by content in the movie that made it really unfriendly to younger kids. Namely the scene where a character gets his neck snapped in full focus, complete with bone-crunching sound effects, even if he totally did deserve it. Add that to the blood that is shown when Kale and Akima are hit by gunfire, sprinkle in a few curse words and some partial nudity, and the result was just too much for parents to want to take their young kids to see, though somehow the film did earn a PG rating. Even the producer, Gary Goldman, said, "I don't think anyone under 8 years old should see this film." And all of that without mentioning the soundtrack, which was, for my generation, awesome, but probably made the boomers in the audience shout at the producers to get off their damn lawn. I probably should have taken out that joke since I'm now in my 30s and feeling that energy on a nearly daily basis, but I'm on the third version of the script now and I could not be fucked to do it, so sue me. But that wasn't the only reason it failed. Other factors joined in to kick this upstart film that dared to reach outside the Disney family-friendly bubble while it was down. The first one was a previous Fox live-action film that released a month before, Battlefield Earth, featuring a dreadlock-wearing John Travolta. This Dutch-angled travesty of a science fiction film completely and utterly flopped at the box office and was panned universally by critics, currently sitting at a 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. 3%! That's right on par with Adam Sandler's Jack and Jill, for context. As a science fiction fan, I cannot express how much I hate this film, and resented my mother for making me see it in theaters just because it had her favorite actor in it. So before this release, Titan AE was being marketed as Titan After Earth, but once Battlefield bombed, it switched to the title we know today, Titan AE. Likely, audiences burned by a sci-fi movie with a similar title just 1 month prior probably didn't want to go see this one. But really though, it's the marketing in general that was just abysmal. In addition to the problem of marketing to a very slim demographic, and one that isn't quite old enough to drive to a theater and see it themselves, it just wasn't given enough room to breathe in terms of advertising. This is something common with most Don Bluth-led films. Whether this is just a result of eschewing big animation studios, resulting in smaller advertising budgets, or just how he likes to do things, it's unclear. Add to that the influence of the giant bully Disney, which released Fantasia 2000 at the exact same time to cut into the film's audience, which is a stunt that they did in a previous Fox animation film, Anastasia, and it spelled woe for Titan AE. All of these issues scream of a studio confused about the film in their hands. It took them over a year and $30 million just to figure out that it probably should be animated. And even then, the studio was seemingly unable to create a decent marketing strategy for the film. And so the movie and its potential for a wider audience suffered for it. Only a few weeks later, Fox Animation Studios shut down. And since then, we haven't gotten another major science fiction animated epic like this, unfortunately. Despite its flaws, this film is simply breathtaking. Like Roger Ebert said, it fills one with a sense of wonder and makes you feel like you're looking through the Hubble telescope yourself, out to brilliant worlds filled with diverse life and unimaginable environments. Its characters and music are ripped straight from the late 90s America, yet because they were so well written, they still feel relevant today. Whether it's Kale overcoming his distant, apathetic attitude, or Akima acting as an agent of that change, they're all relatable to someone. And I mean, come on, Goon! My man Goon! Seriously, if you don't comment below that Goon is your favorite character ever, we are no longer friends. What the film lacks in originality, it more than makes up for in its heart, which is at the same time both front and center and subtly prodding through Corso and the Dredge. Its visuals and its use of CGI are breathtaking and were, at the time, on the cutting edge of what was possible. By all rights, the film should have been a massive success, but due to bad studio management, layoffs, sabotage by Disney, and inadvertently by their own films, and Fox Animation's poor marketing practices overall, the film had an awful release and ended up being the downfall of a major animation studio. So we're left with the question of what might have been. What might have been if this movie had been successful? Might other animation studios have followed suit in making their own sci-fi space operas? Well, considering how DreamWorks and Disney operate, pilfering ideas from each other, yes, probably. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and so we're left with our question. But at the end of the day, this magnificent, beautiful failure of a film still exists. Even today, as an adult, I feel giddy watching this movie and remembering the weird kid I used to be, the type of kid that goes on Dogpile or Alta Vista, searching for exoplanets and printing off the web pages to keep in a manila folder. And if that weird kid still exists inside of you too, then I highly suggest either giving this movie a try or going back for a rewatch. Neither you nor they will be disappointed. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this. This has been a video a long time in the making, and by long time I mean about maybe a month now, which is a long time in terms of my channel. I wanted to give a huge shout out to Ben Barney. He is my first patron, and I think that is so fucking cool. Thank you so much, man. You rock. If anybody else would like to support my channel, you can go to my link. I'll put it in the description. It's patreon.com/meromorphic. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I am @meromorphic8. Otherwise, I'm totally happy with your viewership, and you can like and subscribe if you have not already. Thank you so much again for all your support, and I will see you guys next time.